What's up everyone? Thanks for tuning in. Today's lesson is going to be another transcription breakdown where we take apart a solo by a great trombone player. Today we're going to focus on the trombonist who has been the most influential modern trombonist to my own playing, and that is the great Steve Davis. The solo we're going to look at today is Blues Around the World from his album Meant to Be. This was released way back in 2004, and this is a C blues. It's actually a double blues. It's 24 measures long instead of 12. However, the chord changes are still basically the same. It's just that everything is twice as long as it would be in a normal 12-bar blues. All right, let's get into it by checking out the first chorus of this solo. Now, I've transcribed a lot of Steve Davis over the years. As I said, he's one of my biggest influences, but this solo always really sticks out in my mind as a really great example of his playing. He uses a lot of sort of pentatonic-ish ideas, not necessarily just the pentatonic scale, but some of the shapes that are commonly found in the pentatonic scale. And he does a really great job of playing like some really hip, interesting harmonic stuff, but it's all really, really singable. It never feels like we're so far out on a limb because the melodies are so strong that even when he's outside of the changes, it really holds it all together. And then finally, he just plays some really nice blues stuff in it. He really tempers some of these more interesting, complex harmonic ideas he's playing with really just nice, classic sounding blues ideas. So let's check out this first chorus. Cool. Now for our actual kind of breakdown and getting into this solo today, we're going to start at the beginning of the second chorus. So basically right where we left off, where he plays this idea. Now this is a classic example of why I think Steve Davis is so great. He's taking a simple idea, in this case scales and thirds, and he's playing it in the Mixolydian mode instead of just the major scale in this case because we have all dominant chords. And he's manipulating it in a way that makes it actually more hip than just that simple scales and thirds type of exercise. Now we're going to the 4 chord here, and when he starts the middle of this lick where he plays do da da do da da do da da da, he actually starts on the tritone sub of C7. So he plays this idea on G flat dominant 7. So that sets up our 4 chord, and then he just transposes the entire idea right into the 4 chord, essentially down a half step, and then he does extend it a little bit after this line that we have written here is finished. For my money, this is how we want to employ some of these patterns and other figures like this, is we want to take something that's very sort of simple, melodic, singable, and maybe twist it a little bit with some more interesting harmony, and then suddenly it sounds like we're playing something really hip, even though we're just using something simple like scales and thirds. Another great thing here that he does, he sort of sets up the listener's ears to expect a little bit of something dissonant coming by what he starts out by playing with. He lands on that juicy sharp 11 of C7, and that immediately is going to tell the rhythm section, hey, something is about to happen, and even the audience members, something is about to happen. Then he fulfills that, and then he resolves right back into F7. This is a great idea to move through all the keys. So let's check out this scales and third pattern. I'm going to do the exact pattern that he plays through a couple of different keys here, just to see how we can explore this through our entire range of our instruments so we can have this vocabulary at our ready disposal. So there's the first 4 keys kind of moving to the left around the circle of fifths, but really you should take this all 12 keys and try to apply this in your own solos. I started on the 5th on each one because that's what he does in this particular case, but clearly you could play this across your entire usable range as you saw fit. The next area of interest for me in this solo starts at the very end of the second chorus, going into the third chorus. I mentioned at the top of this lesson that he really uses some nice pentatonic shapes in here, and so we'll hear that in this example. Let's check it out. Now, what's going on in this little phrase is that he's using some sort of what we call sidestepping pentatonic shapes. Again, he's not necessarily playing just the pentatonic scale, it's all about the shapes that are in that scale. So the interesting part, having this kind of in the second half of the phrase, he plays this idea. And we can see that that is two pentatonic shapes that are sort of half step away from each other. He plays a D minor pentatonic shape where he plays the root, the flat third, the fifth down to the fourth. And then he moves that same idea up a half step so that it's an E flat minor. And then the second time he does just go down that E flat minor pentatonic scale. Now the question might be, why doesn't he actually start in one of the pentatonic scales that's sort of associated with C7? So we might think C major pentatonic or A minor pentatonic or G minor pentatonic. These would be kind of the most typical avenues you could go. However, he might have been thinking, well, I want to access this E flat minor pentatonic over C7. That gives us, again, this sort of altered sound or a tritone subsound because E flat minor pentatonic is the same as G flat major pentatonic. And he knew he could get there by doing this interesting sidestepping motion by starting a half step below that E flat minor pentatonic sound. This harmonic concept is a great one to move through the keys. Now, he does it not necessarily resolving anywhere specific, but this would be something great to really think about. I'm going to imply this on a 5 chord that's then eventually going to move to a 1 chord. So again, let's check this out through the first 4 keys, moving counterclockwise around our circle. Coming back to our solo, we're going to continue on through the rest of the third chorus. I'm going to start at the 4 chord and then play to the end of this third chorus, which is actually the end of the solo. And there's a couple things I want to point out in there once we hear through. So let's check it out. All right, starting at the 4 chord in that section. So he comes out of the gate there playing a sort of diatonic triad or maybe triad pair idea about how he shapes that line. Now he does play some other notes in there, but the main sort of chord tones and how he works that shape down in a scalar fashion is really reminiscent of playing diatonic triads or maybe triad pairs, in this case in F7. So we can either think about the diatonic triads that are created by F7 or F mixolydian, or we could think about the 2 triad pairs that are common for that chord. That would be an F dominant 7 chord and an E flat major 7 chord. We could really think about this idea in either way. So let's check this out, and I'll put up sort of the kind of simplified shape in a staff below the main idea that Steve Davis plays. You can see the main chord tones or resolution notes that he hits use this sort of diatonic triad approach. He starts on sort of a C minor 7 shape, then down to B flat major, then to A, what would be diminished, I guess, if we're thinking in terms of this F7 mixolydian mode and the triads that are created in there. So that is a relatively elaborate line that he plays working through this concept of diatonic triads or triad pairs. And I think for us as transcribers, it can sometimes be more important for us to deal with the concept than exactly the line he played in this case. Now, there are times where we're going to want to just verbatim learn the lines that the great musicians played, learn them in all 12 keys, try to get them in our playing. But in this case, I think we can take that concept, digest it, distill a good idea from it, and then move that through all 12 keys. So here's my distilled idea based on what Steve Davis played. Now, even though that line is a little simpler than what Steve Davis played, it still hits all the resolution points and kind of moves through those diatonic triads in the same way. So I'm going to move that through the first 4 keys of the circle of fifths, moving to the left. By looking at the concept here versus just the verbatim line, we can actually be informed by the great musicians and not necessarily just copies of them. We do want to do a fair amount of copying in that learning process, but eventually we want to sound like Sean Bell, not like Steve Davis. And so we want to think, all right, well, how did Steve Davis spin this harmonic idea? And then how can I do that and make it my own? Now, at the beginning of this lesson, I mentioned how he does a great job of also employing some blues in this solo. Let's check this out here in the last little chunk of this third chorus. That's all some pretty classic sounding, just blues playing, and I think it really works well to create balance in the solo. For really most of the 2 choruses before this, he played a lot of moving 16th note lines, he played a lot of sort of interesting harmonic ideas. While yes, they were all melodic, and that blues kind of sensibility was sprinkled throughout, here he just lays it right down to end this solo right in the pocket, right with some serious like blues type of ideas, and it just creates a nice bookend on this solo, so it really feels satisfying. Another point on solo construction to end this transcription breakdown today, he plays this type of idea several times in this solo. That was leading into the very first chorus. He actually starts a solo on the turnaround of the melody. Now we hear that idea several other times. He also plays it at the end of the first chorus, slight variation, but very similar. And then he plays it one more time to actually end the solo. Now, whether he was consciously thinking about that, his ear just guided him, or maybe, as we all do sometimes, we kind of get stuck playing in a little idea in a solo, whether we want to or not, just because that's where our ear takes us. I would really like to think it's one of the first 2, where he was really thinking a little bit about construction and having a little continuity across the entire solo. Whether we know it or not, most of us like a balance of some sort of repetition and predictability with some surprises as listeners. As improvisers, we probably think, well, everything is all new and it's all surprises, but I think for the most part, audience members and listeners in general, we like to have something to grab onto. And having a little bit of sort of an idea that spans across an entire solo, or even just a tiny little lick like this that helps to sort of glue things together, can really make a solo feel more compositional and more intentional rather than just totally stream of consciousness off the top of my head. That can be cool as well in some cases, but I think it's nice to have a little bit of glue that holds it together, and I really think that lick does that in this case. All right, there we have it. Steve Davis' solo on Blues Around the World from the album Meant to Be. He is one of my all-time favorite trombonists and somebody who I think sometimes is overlooked in sort of the modern trombone hierarchy because he doesn't have the sort of flashy technique that some other players do, but everything he plays is so musical, so full of intention and soul that I really think he deserves to be someone that you check out with a fair amount of diligence and really look into his recorded history.